I'm sitting in that plastic graduation chair, cap crooked on my head, when I see him walking down the aisle in full military dress uniform. My heart stops. It's the same man I'd given my jacket to just 24 hours earlier, the homeless veteran shivering outside the gas station. But now he's here, at my college graduation, walking straight toward the podium with purpose in his step. The entire auditorium falls silent as he takes the microphone. His eyes scan the crowd until they find mine, and he smiles. Yesterday, a young man reminded me what service really means. He begins, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about kindness. Before we get into it, hit like, subscribe, and leave me a comment telling me about a time someone's kindness surprised you. Your support really helps me share more stories like this one, and I love reading about the good still happening in this world. 24 hours earlier, I was walking home from my last final exam, my backpack heavy with textbooks I'd probably never open again. The December air bit through my thin jacket, the only warm coat I owned, and I pulled it tighter around me. College had been a struggle, financially and emotionally. My part-time job at the campus bookstore barely covered ramen noodles and rent for my tiny studio apartment. As I turned to the corner toward the gas station, I saw him, an older man hunched against the brick wall, wearing layers of torn clothing that did nothing against the wind. His graying hair was matted, his hands red and cracked from the cold. A cardboard sign sat beside him. Veteran. Anything helps. God bless. I slowed my pace, feeling that familiar tug in my chest. My wallet held exactly $10, my grocery money until my next paycheck in 3 days. But looking at him, seeing the way his shoulders shook with each gust of wind, I couldn't just walk past. My mom had always said, when you have a choice between being comfortable and being kind, choose kindness. I stopped about 5 feet away, close enough to see the resignation in his weathered face, the way he wasn't even really looking at the people passing by anymore. He'd given up expecting help. My fingers found the crumpled $10 bill in my pocket, and I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Let me back up and tell you why this moment mattered so much. I was Marcus Thompson, 22 years old, about to graduate with a degree in social work that I'd fought tooth and nail to earn. My parents had both worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives. My dad in construction, my mom as a nurse's aide, sacrificing everything to give me opportunities they never had. When I told them I wanted to help people for a living instead of pursuing the business degree they'd hoped for, the disappointment in their eyes nearly broke me. Social work doesn't pay the bills, Marcus, my father had said, his voice heavy with concern. We worked our asses off so you could have security, son. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my purpose was to help people who felt invisible, forgotten by society. Maybe it was because I'd felt invisible myself, the quiet kid who ate lunch alone, who wore the same 3 outfits to school because that's all we could afford. College hadn't been the transformative experience I'd imagined. While my classmates went to parties and joined sororities, I worked 25 hours a week shelving books and ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, more nights than I care to admit. My student loans were staggering, over $60,000 that would follow me for decades. Some nights, lying in my narrow dorm bed, I wondered if my parents were right. Maybe I should have chosen a more practical path. The week leading up to finals had been particularly brutal. I'd been surviving on 3 hours of sleep, energy drinks, and sheer stubbornness. My final exam that day, Social Policy and Administration, had been the culmination of 4 years of studying systems designed to help people who'd fallen through society's cracks. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was barely hanging on myself. My bank account showed $47.83. After rent, I'd have exactly $10 to last until my next paycheck. I'd already calculated that I could buy a loaf of bread, peanut butter, and ramen noodles, enough to survive until Friday. It wasn't glamorous, but I'd done it before. But that morning, something felt different. Maybe it was the finality of finishing my last exam, Or maybe it was the way the winter sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in weeks. I felt lighter somehow, like I was walking towards something instead of just surviving day by day. Graduation was tomorrow. The first person in my family to earn a college degree. Despite everything, despite the debt and the uncertainty about my future, I was proud. My jacket, a second-hand wool peacoat I'd found at Goodwill sophomore year, had been my companion through every cold walk to class, every late night studying in the library when the heat got turned down. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was warm. As I walked past the familiar storefronts and apartment buildings of my college town for what might be the last time, I thought about all the choices that had led me here. The gas station on 5th Street was my usual stop, not because I could afford gas, but because they had the cheapest coffee in town, and sometimes I'd splurge on a cup when the campus library got too cold. I'd passed homeless individuals there before, usually hurrying past with my eyes down, telling myself I couldn't afford to help when I could barely help myself. But something about that December evening, about the way the streetlights made everything look golden and possible, made me slow down, made me really see. As I approached him, I noticed details that made my chest tighten. His boots, military-issue combat boots that had seen better decades, were split at the seams, cardboard visible through the cracks where he'd tried to keep the water out. The jacket he wore was army green, but so faded and torn it barely resembled the uniform it once was. On his left shoulder, I could make out the ghost of a patch that had been removed, leaving only the outline of what might have been a rank insignia. His hands were the worst part. They were wrapped around a styrofoam cup that looked empty, fingers so stiff from cold they barely seemed to bend. The knuckles were split and bleeding, and I could see old scars crisscrossing his palms, the kind that come from working with your hands your whole life, or maybe from something darker. "Excuse me," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, and I was struck by his eyes, pale blue, clear and intelligent but hollow, with a kind of tiredness that went deeper than just needing sleep. There was dignity there, too, even sitting on the cold concrete with a cardboard sign, "Yes, miss." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately, but polite, respectful. The way my grandfather used to talk to strangers, with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed to come from another era. I crouched down so we were at eye level, ignoring the way the cold sidewalk bit through my jeans. Up close, I could smell the mixture of unwashed clothes and something else. Not alcohol, like I'd expected, but something medicinal. Antiseptic, maybe. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, then stopped. Why was I apologizing? I wanted to ask, "Are you a veteran?" Something shifted in his expression. Not defensiveness exactly, but wariness. Like he'd been asked that question before, and it hadn't gone well. "Yes, miss. Army. Did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan." He said it simply, without pride or bitterness, just stating facts. "Thank you for your service, I say service," I said and meant it. My words seemed to surprise him. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a moment the wariness softened. "That's kind of you to say." He shifted position, and I heard him wince, a sharp intake of breath that spoke of old injuries, bones that didn't work quite right anymore. "Most folks just keep walking." The wind picked up then, and I watched him pull that inadequate jacket tighter around his frame. He was probably in his 50s, but the cold and the street had aged him. Still, there was something about the way he held himself, straight-backed even sitting down, shoulders squared despite the chill, that spoke of military bearing that hadn't been entirely beaten out of him. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, like he wasn't used to people wanting to know. "Frank," he said finally. "Frank Morrison. I'm Marcus." I held out my hand, and after a moment's surprise, he shook it. His grip was firm despite the cold, calloused and strong. "How long have you been out here, Frank?" "Tonight? About 3 hours. In general?" He gave a bitter little laugh. "Going on 8 months now. Lost my apartment when I couldn't work anymore." He gestured vaguely at his left leg. Took some shrapnel in Kandahar. Finally caught up with me. 8 months. 8 months of nights like this. Of cold that cut through whatever inadequate layers he could find. Of people walking past without seeing him. The weight of that settled in my stomach like a stone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my $10 bill, the one I'd been mentally allocating for groceries. "Frank, I want you to have this." He stared at the money like I was offering him $1,000,000. "Miss, I can't take that. You look like you're a student. You probably need it more than I do." His refusal made my throat tight. Here was a man who clearly hadn't eaten a real meal in days, worried about taking money from someone else who was struggling. "Please," I said, I insist, "get yourself something warm to eat." He looked at me for a long moment, those pale blue eyes searching my face. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "I'm sure." Frank took the bill with shaking fingers, and I saw him blink rapidly. "God bless you, miss. This means more than you know." But as I watched him carefully fold the money and tuck it into his breast pocket, I realized the $10 wasn't enough. It might buy him one meal, maybe two if he was careful, but then he'd be right back here tomorrow night, shivering against the same brick wall. Without really thinking about it, I started shrugging out of my jacket. "What are you doing?" Frank asked, alarmed. "You need this more than I do." The cold hit me immediately as I pulled my arms free, but I ignored it. "I've got a warm apartment to go home to. You don't." "Absolutely not." Frank struggled to his feet, faster than I'd expected despite his injured leg. Standing, he was taller than I'd realized, probably 6'2" in his prime, though he was slightly stooped now. "I won't take the coat off your back, young lady, that's not right." "Frank, please." I held the jacket out to him. "Look at me. I'm 22, healthy, and I'll be inside in 10 minutes. You're sitting on concrete in 30-degree weather. This isn't charity, it's common sense." We stood there in a standoff, me holding out the coat, him refusing to take it. Other people walked past, giving us curious looks, but I didn't care. Something about Frank, maybe the dignity in his refusal, maybe the way he'd called me young lady, like his own daughter, made me more determined. "Tell you what," I said, struck by inspiration. "Consider it a loan. When you get back on your feet, you can find me and give it back." That made him smile, the first real smile I'd seen from him. It transformed his face completely, erasing years of hardship and revealing the man he must have been before life knocked him down. "A loan, huh? What if I can't find you?" "Then keep it and pass it on to someone else who needs it." I stepped closer and draped the jacket around his shoulders before he could protest again. It was too small for his frame, but it was warm, and that's what mattered. Frank's hands came up to pull the coat closer, and I saw his eyes close briefly, like he was savoring the warmth. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "What's your name again?" he asked quietly. "Marcus Thompson." "Well, Marcus Thompson, I want you to know that what you just did, it's not just about the money or the coat. It's about seeing me, really seeing me, not just walking past like I'm part of the scenery." His voice was thick with emotion. "Most days I feel invisible, but not tonight." I felt tears prick my own eyes. "Everyone deserves to be seen, Frank." He nodded slowly. "You're going to do good things in this world, Marcus. I can tell." As I walked away from Frank, the cold hit me like a physical blow. Without my jacket, the December wind cut through my thin sweater like it was made of tissue paper. By the time I'd gone 2 blocks, my teeth were chattering so hard I couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to. But I felt warm inside, if that makes sense. Like I'd done something that mattered. The walk home took 15 minutes that felt like an hour. I kept my arms wrapped around myself, head down against the wind, moving as fast as I could without running. Other pedestrians gave me strange looks. A girl in December wearing nothing but jeans and a sweater, clearly freezing, but I didn't care. Every step reminded me of Frank sitting on that cold concrete, and every shiver reminded me why I'd made the right choice. My apartment building came into view like a mirage in the desert. I fumbled with my keys, hands so numb I could barely grip them, and practically fell through the door when it finally opened. The heat hit me like a wall, and I stood there in my tiny entryway, letting the warmth seep back into my bones. But as I looked around my studio apartment, the secondhand furniture, the pile of textbooks I couldn't afford to buy new, the empty refrigerator humming in the corner, reality set in. I'd just given away my only warm coat and my grocery money. Graduation was tomorrow, and I'd be sitting outside for hours in whatever cold weather gear I could cobble together from my meager wardrobe. I opened my closet and stared at my options. A thin cardigan my grandmother had knitted, a hoodie from my high school that had holes in the elbows, a blazer I'd bought for job interviews that was meant for fall weather, not winter, nothing that would keep me warm during an outdoor graduation ceremony in December. The doubt crept in slowly, like cold water rising. Had I been impulsive? Naive? I thought about calling my parents, asking if they could wire me money for groceries, but I knew what they'd say. They'd want to know where my money had gone. And when I told them, I'd see that familiar disappointment in their voices. Sarah always thinks with her heart instead of her head, I could hear my mother saying. That's why she'll never get ahead. I made myself a cup of tea with the last tea bag in my box and sat on my bed, looking out the window at the streetlights. Somewhere out there, Frank was hopefully finding a warm place to sleep, maybe buying a hot meal with the money I'd given him. The thought made the sacrifice feel worth it, but it didn't solve my immediate problems. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate from freshman year, now living in California. Can't wait to see pics from graduation tomorrow. So proud of you. I stared at the message, realizing I'd probably be too embarrassed to take many pictures. What would I tell people when they asked about my outfit? That I'd given my coat to a homeless man the night before? It sounded made up, even to me. But then I remembered Frank's eyes when I draped the jacket around his shoulders, the way his whole body had relaxed, like he was letting himself hope for the first time in months. The way he'd said, "God bless you," like he really meant it, like those words carried weight. I'd spent 4 years studying social work, learning about systemic poverty and structural inequality and best practices for helping vulnerable populations. But until tonight, it had all been theoretical. Tonight, I'd learned what it felt like to help someone with my own hands, my own sacrifice. It hurt, yes. I was cold and worried and facing a day of discomfort. But it also felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. Graduation morning dawned gray and bitter cold, with a wind that seemed to cut right through the campus. I'd layered everything I owned, the hoodie under the blazer under the cardigan, and I still felt like I was dressed for October instead of December. My family had driven down from Ohio, and I could see the concern in my mother's eyes when she hugged me. "Marcus, where is your winter coat?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. "I lost it," I said, not quite lying. "But I'm fine, Mom, really." My father frowned at my outfit but didn't say anything. They'd already expressed their doubts about my degree choice. I didn't need to give them more ammunition by admitting I'd given away my necessities to a stranger. The ceremony was held on the main quad, with rows of white chairs set up facing a temporary stage. Faculty members in their colorful academic regalia sat in the front, looking like exotic birds against the gray morning. I found my seat in the tea section, Thompson, Marcus, and tried to ignore the way the metal chair felt like ice through my thin pants. As the ceremony began, I focused on staying warm and trying to feel proud instead of anxious. The dean gave his speech about facing the future with courage and compassion. The valedictorian talked about service and making the world better. All words I believed in, but sitting there shivering, I mostly just wanted it to be over. Then came the awards portion. I zoned out, clapping politely as names were called for various honors and scholarships I'd never qualified for. My GPA was respectable but not outstanding, and I'd been too busy working to participate in the kind of extracurricular activities that impressed scholarship committees. "The next award," the dean announced, is a special recognition that comes to us from the mayor's office. The Community Service Award recognizes a graduating senior who has demonstrated exceptional compassion and selfless service to others. I clapped along with everyone else, wondering who would win. Probably someone from the honors program who'd spent their summers building houses for Habitat for Humanity or teaching English in developing countries. This year's recipient was nominated by a community member who wished to recognize an act of kindness that, and I quote, restored my faith in humanity and reminded me what true service looks like. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unusual. Most awards were nominated by faculty or fellow students, not random community members. I'd like to invite the nominator to present this award personally, the dean continued. Please welcome Mr. Frank Morrison. My heart stopped. Frank Morrison? It couldn't be. But then I saw him, walking across the stage with purpose and dignity I hadn't seen the night before. Gone were the torn clothes and military surplus jacket. Instead, he wore a crisp army dress uniform, complete with ribbons and decorations that caught the weak sunlight. His hair was neatly trimmed, his posture straight and proud. This was Frank Morrison, as he was meant to be seen, not as a broken man on the street, but as a decorated veteran, a person of honor and substance. The crowd fell silent as he approached the podium. His eyes scanned the sea of graduates until they found mine, and when they did, he smiled. That same transformative smile I'd seen the night before, but now it carried something else. Recognition, gratitude, purpose. Yesterday evening, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent quad, a young woman stopped on her walk home and saw me, really saw me. My classmates were looking around, wondering who he was talking about. My parents were looking confused, but I sat frozen, understanding beginning to dawn like sunrise after the longest night. This young woman didn't just see a homeless veteran on the street, Frank continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. She saw a human being who was cold and hungry and forgotten. Without hesitation, she gave me her last $10, money I later learned was meant for her own groceries. But that wasn't enough for her. She took the coat off her own back in 30-degree weather and insisted I take it. The crowd was completely silent now. I could feel hundreds of eyes scanning the graduates, trying to figure out who he was talking about. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. When I tried to refuse, she called it a loan. She said when I got back on my feet, I could find her and give it back. Frank's voice cracked slightly. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, is that I wasn't really homeless. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. My own confusion was total. What did he mean he wasn't really homeless? Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. For the past year, I've been working with the Mayor's Office and the Veterans Administration on a project to understand the challenges facing homeless veterans in our city. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Frank Morrison, retired, and I was conducting undercover research to identify gaps in our support services. The paper he held up looked official. Government letterhead, signatures, seals. My mind reeled. Lieutenant Colonel, undercover research. This couldn't be real. I spent 8 months living on the streets, in shelters, experiencing firsthand what thousands of our veterans face every day. I've been ignored, looked through, treated like I was invisible or dangerous. In 8 months of this research, only 3 people stopped to really help me. Only one gave me everything she had. He looked directly at me again, and I felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Marcus Thompson, he said, and my name echoed across the quad like a benediction. Would you please stand? On shaking legs I stood. Every head in the graduating class turned toward me. I heard my mother gasp, heard my father whisper something in rapid Mandarin. The cold I'd been fighting all morning was nothing compared to the numbness spreading through my body. Marcus Thompson, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, continued, gave me more than money and warmth yesterday. He gave me hope. He reminded me why I spent 26 years in the Army, why we serve, why we sacrifice. He embodied every value we try to instill in our service members: honor, courage, compassion, and selfless service. He held up a plaque that gleamed in the winter light. The mayor of our city has asked me to present you with the Community Service Award, along with a check for $5,000 to help you start your career in social work, a career that I know will change countless lives. $5,000. The amount hit me like a physical blow. That was more money than I'd ever had at one time. It would pay off my credit cards, give me a security deposit for an apartment, let me start my career without the crushing anxiety of immediate financial pressure. But more than the money was the recognition, the validation. A decorated military officer, a man who'd served his country with honor, was telling a crowd of people that my small act of kindness mattered, that seeing people, really seeing them, was important work. Marcus, would you please come up here? Lieutenant Colonel Morrison asked. I walked toward the stage on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, the applause of my classmates and families washing over me like a wave. Standing on that stage, holding the plaque and check, looking out at the sea of faces, including my parents' tear-streaked expressions of pride and amazement, I understood something fundamental about kindness that no textbook had ever taught me. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had spent 8 months researching homelessness, experiencing the worst of human indifference and cruelty, but he'd also been waiting to see if anyone would choose compassion over convenience, generosity over self-preservation. In a way, he'd been testing not just our city's support systems, but our humanity itself. Marcus, he said quietly, just for me to hear, I want you to know that what you did last night, it wasn't just about helping one person. You reminded me why this work matters, why people like you are exactly what our communities need. I thought about all the times I'd walked past someone in need, telling myself I couldn't afford to help, all the times I'd chosen comfort over courage, practicality over compassion. The one time I'd chosen differently had changed everything. As I walked back to my seat, diploma and award in hand, I realized this was what my professors had been trying to teach us about social work. It's not just about policies and programs and systematic change, though those things matter enormously. It's about seeing people, all people, the forgotten ones, the invisible ones, the ones society has written off as lost causes or statistics. My parents couldn't stop hugging me after the ceremony. We're so proud, my mother kept saying, so proud. My father, not usually one for emotional displays, wiped his eyes and said, You chose the right path, son. You chose the right path. The jacket I'd given Frank was folded neatly in a box he handed me later, cleaned and mended. A loan returned, he said with that transformative smile, but tucked into the pocket was something else. A business card for a social work position with the Veterans Administration, starting salary significantly higher than anything I dared to hope for. We need people like you, he said simply. People who see. That night, lying in my apartment with the check on my nightstand and a job offer that would let me help veterans like the man Frank had pretended to be, I understood that kindness isn't just about helping others. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, about choosing to believe that everyone has dignity and worth. Sometimes the person you help turns out to be exactly who they seem. Sometimes they turn out to be someone who can change your life forever. But the real magic isn't in the outcome. It's in the moment you choose to see another person and respond with your whole heart. That's a lesson worth freezing for.